Hi everyone, I declare the meeting of the 13th of April 2022 City Planning and Environment Committee meeting open at 6:38 p.m. Everyone at this meeting is reminded to conduct themselves in a polite and professional manner, keep communication factual, use appropriate language and tone, do not use any defamatory or derogatory remarks. I also ask councillors to observe the requirements under the Code of Meeting Practice and meeting etiquette, including debate on an item will commence only once we have a mover and seconder for the item. The mover of the recommendation has first right to speak on the item. The mover has a right of reply before the recommendation or motion is put to a vote. Raise your hand to indicate you wish to speak, as I will determine the speaking order based on the hands I see. Please indicate whether you are speaking for or against this item. You can speak for up to 5 minutes on a motion and a similar time for any amendment. For the efficient conduct of this meeting, it's not necessary for you to repeat the matters you agree with and raised by any previous speaker. It's sufficient for you to say that you agree with the points raised. I also remind you that video recording is an official record of council and may be made available to persons upon request in accordance with the Government Information Public Access Act 2009. No other recordings are permitted. So number one on our agenda this evening is the acknowledgement of country. And Bayside Council respects the traditional custodians of the land, elders past and present, on which this meeting takes place, and acknowledges the Gadigal and Bidjigal clans of the Sydney Basin. Now we have some councillors joining us online this evening, so I'm putting a procedural motion to allow councillors to participate by audio-visual, and this includes Councillors Muscat and Councillor Curry. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
Yep, I'll move it.
Moved by Councillor Werner and seconded by Councillor Barlow. We've received apologies from Councillors Saravinovsky and Councillor Douglas. Are there any other apologies or requests for leave of absence? Would someone like to move and second that the apologies be granted?
Yep.
Moved by Councillor Werner, seconded by Councillor Barlow. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All those against the motion, please say against. I think we need to go back to the procedural one and vote on it, do we? So all those in favour of the procedural motion to allow the audio, so moved by Councillor Barlow, seconded by Councillor Werner, declare the motion carried. Disclosures of interest. I remind councillors that you should also notify the General Manager in advance of the meeting of any disclosures of interest so that the Minute Secretary can prepare them on the screen. Any disclosures of interest must also be made at the meeting. Are there any councillors who wish to disclose an interest? I have it that no councillors wish to disclose an interest. This will be noted in the minutes. Thank you, councillors. Item 4, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Minutes of the City Planning and Environment meeting on the 9th of March 2022. Can I ask two councillors who are present at the meeting to move and second the confirmation of the minutes? Moved by Councillor Barlow, seconded by Councillor Curry. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All those against say no. I declare the minutes confirmed. So there's no need for item 5 items by exception, as we'll deal with all the items individually. So we move on to public forum. So members of the public who have applied to speak at the meeting are now invited to address the meeting. We have one speaker for public forum. The speaker is advised that a warning bell will sound when only 1 minute of speaking time remains. So the speaker we have tonight is for item CPE 22.009, Draft Planning Proposal, 187 Slade Road, Bexley North. I invite Mr Christopher Fletcher, affected neighbour speaking against the officer recommendation, to address the meeting. Christopher, would you like to approach the podium? Go Go ahead, Christopher.
Thank you. As a resident of Sanfield Circuit, I back onto the, I can see over the roof of Betsy Hill Hotel at this stage. I've read that they wish to amend the height of the development, of the proposed maximum height limit, and as such, I would be affected by this negatively, as I would have limited view, limited access to sun, limited access to what I already have at the moment, and as such, I would be quite negatively affected. I would probably be one of the most affected residents of that area, and as such, I've requested to speak tonight. Any change in the height and density would obviously have more people and more traffic. That would be a secondary concern of mine. Bexley North is, as I'm sure all of you are aware, quite a very lovely suburb, and is at this stage not allowed to proceed with developments or applications of that height, and as such, I would ask that the council look into to allow it to remain as it is, and that I'm not against progress or anything. I just am quite heavily impacted to a point where such a change of height limits would such impact me to a point where I am required to now speak. And that's all I really particularly wish to address, is that I would be such affected that I would no longer be able to see anything really from where I am in my apartment. So, and as such, that's all I wish to state.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. We appreciate you taking the time to come here and address us this evening. We will now deal with the item, which is item CPE 22.009. Can everyone on...
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, in relation to this item, I would like to move an alternative motion. I'd like to put it to councillors who are present on this committee that council considers the draft planning proposal for 187 Slade Road, Bexley, to be an overdevelopment of the site based on a range of factors, including but not limited to excessive increased height limits and floor space ratios. And number two, that council does not endorse the planning proposal for a gateway determination.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow.
Very good.
So there's the officer's recommendation is not currently on the screen, but in the report, that motion would change to that council does not endorse the planning proposal for a gateway to determination. So flipping point 2 around to does not endorse, but point 1 being that the planning proposal is an overdevelopment of HOB and FSR. Is that correct, Councillor Curry?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have tried to email that through. Let me just try and email that through once more. I've got limited, if you don't mind, so it can be placed on the screen for all councillors and the public to view. I'll try that again, Mr. Soot, see if that comes through. Yeah,
we will just need to flip the screen so the minutes are being displayed on the screen. But is there any discussion in relation to the motion moved by Councillor Curry and seconded by Councillor Barlow?
Yes, please. Yeah,
Councillor Werner? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I'll if you don't mind, I'll just speak to my amended motion. Thank you. The new motion. So, look, we have a very clear LEP, and council has endorsed a new LEP in 2021, and that specifically looked at all sites, and the LEP is the instrument, and I'm just going through this for the purposes of new councillors as well as for the purposes of public that are listening here. The LEP is the instrument that council has endorsed, which determines the height, the FSR, and that is allowed across Bayside Council. And then what we're seeing before us now is a planning proposal where there is a request to increase the height quite dramatically and increase the FSR. And particularly, in a where there is a number of low-rise residential properties surrounding it. And if you look at the business papers, you can see from the images there that, it is an overdevelopment for the site where it is proposed. Chair, we can't hear at the moment.
Oh, I do have my microphone on. But
Oh, sorry, Councillor Werner, we didn't.
Are you able to hear?
Now, yeah, with your microphone, thank you.
Oh, okay, good. I think the recommendation is quite confusing because on one hand it's saying that it gives a specific building height going from 16 metres to up to 35 metres. But then later on, at point 3 and 4, it says that the height and the floor space ratio would then be negotiated with the developer. So that actually, I find that very confusing because if you're giving a height and a floor space ratio, then surely that would be it. So yeah, no, I totally agree that this needs to be changed. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Werner. Is there any further discussion from councillors? Councillor Barlow?
I just thank Madam Mayor for moving that motion because I'd had a couple of phone calls and Christopher was the first one. I do remember you now. And I believe, it's very low rise. I mean, you've got a hill behind in Sarsell Circuit, but it doesn't need to be anything to the bulk of what was there. The one before that I thought was refused, but they actually withdrew it. So, and you can't have it that bulky in that area because of all the residents behind. So I'm happy to move it. I'm happy that I seconded that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Souness has a comment.
This worked. There's been a large number of iterations for this type of the development on this particular parcel of land. At the end of the day, though, the owners, the proponents, have to be aware that the LEP has been on exhibition for some time. There was ample opportunity in the months gone past before it was gazetted to actually make a comment and to participate in the process that we did have. And that boat has sailed, unfortunately. If there really needs to go to a gateway determination, I feel sorry for them because the community has spoken. There was an opportunity to make some changes. There was an opportunity for the community who lived in the immediate area, Slade Road and some other the precincts nearby, actually say no. This is too high. This is too low. This is whatever it is. The opportunity didn't occur. So I support the motion or the alternative motion as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Souness. Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion, I put the recommendation or the motion on the screen, moved by Councillor Curry and Councillor Barlow. All those in favour say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those against the motion say against. I declare the motion carried. That concludes our public forum, and we will now deal with the remaining reports. So we move on to report item CPE 22.007, clause 4.6, variations to development standards quarterly report. There is an officer's recommendation before us. Is there a mover and a seconder?
I'm happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Barlow.
I actually want to amend it, so I can't second that, can I?
No, we need a seconder. Is there a... Do we have a seconder?
The online people?
I'll second it, so we discuss.
Councillor Curry, seconded. Oh, Councillor Muscat, sorry. Would you like your right to reply, Councillor Barlow?
No, it's fine. I haven't got anything in front of me yet. My computer's over there.
I'd like to speak to the recommendation.
Go ahead, Councillor Werner.
Thank you. So the recommendation, basically this seems to be about variations that have been made to DAs, and I would think that any member of the public would look at this and say, well, why did these particular DAs, why were they allowed to have variations and others weren't? So while I'm not against necessarily things being varied, I think there does need to be a bit more information about why. So I have sent through, and I hope Fausto and the governance team has... so you've received that. So the reason that I've put that forward, which is it's the original recommendation, but then we're adding that reports on the use of clause 4.6. So this is the clause that's being used to affect the variations. So when that happens, first of all, we're also told why the standard was varied. And I know there is some information on that in here, but some of the information is not very comprehensive. For instance, in this first DA in this table, it says full compliance will not achieve any additional benefit. Really, that doesn't really give us very much information. So I think we do need more information. I think the members of the public who see this would want more information. I also think we need to be able to see why. So the first one is why it was varied. Point two is how many applications were there to vary the standards in that same time frame, so that we can compare, is this a normal thing that happens, or how many people actually did apply to have this, and then why the other applications to vary the standards were not allowed. And then also what makes this application, where the standard was varied, what makes it different to the other applications where this variation was not granted. And I think that would increase transparency if we had this, because really I'm just thinking of people who've put in a DA and then the heartbreak of having that DA rejected, and then they see someone down the road has had something similar approved, and I really think that our residents deserve a little bit more information on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Werner. Would you like a reply from an officer in regards to this report?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Could I just, Chair, could I just add, to get a bit of an overview, not for councillors but also for residents that might be listening as to this process, so there's some clarity around why it occurs and what the process is, please.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. So every local environmental plan in New South Wales has a clause 4.6 in it, and that is a mechanism that's in there to allow development standards like height and floor space, for example, to be varied under certain circumstances. So it's recognition that those controls are applied in a very broad brush way. So, whole streets and whole suburbs have the same height limit and the same floor space ratio, for example, but not all sites are the same. So the site might be an unusual shape, or it might be sloping or whatever. And so there might be some good reason in some cases why a standard should be varied to give a good outcome. And so that's why clause 4.6 is there. The clause itself has a number of sub-clauses in it, and they're essentially the tests that we have to go through to decide whether a variation can be justified or not. There's also a number of court cases that are quite well sort of.
Sorry, Chair, we've just dropped out. Could the speaker speak to the microphone, please?
Yep. So there's court cases too that have helped clarify how those tests should be applied. So the assessment report done for every DA where there's a variation proposed covers clause 4.6 in some detail. That normally runs to about 3 or 4 pages. It's quite an extensive exercise to go through to examine a variation. All of those assessment reports can be found through online. So any member of the public can use an address or a DA number and access that report in full. So it's the full assessment report that includes the 4.6 variation sort of tests as well. So yeah, that information is in the public domain for anybody who wants to go and look at it. In terms of applications that proposed a variation that wasn't supported, that's not information that we currently track, or it's not data that we hold. So that would be problematic for us to be able to report on that. And likewise, the reasons why they weren't supported, we don't record that either. So the report that's come up to you tonight is a requirement of the state government. We need to put the same information on our website quarterly. We need to report it to the Department of Planning quarterly, and we need to report it to Council quarterly. And the report contains actually more information than we have to provide. And so that's the reason why it comes up here, and you'll get used to seeing that every quarter coming up to a council meeting at the end of each quarter or soon after. So I hope that helps explain a little bit more about clause 4.6.
Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, do I reply now or?
Well, through the chair, I was going to thank Mr. Barber, but also ask you, Councillor Werner, that given that information, are you still putting this amendment up to the officer recommendation?
No, I think it should be changed. Thank you for the information, Mr. Barber. I think it's really great that that information is on the DA tracker, so that means we wouldn't need point A. I guess with the other points, sorry, through the chair, if I could just clarify, Mr. Barber, so when you said that information is currently not collected, would it be possible to collect information like that? Would that be fairly... Because I guess you'd have to go through all the DAs and maybe while they're being approved, then keep track of it.
Through you, Chair, the challenge is that applications that fall into that category are sometimes refused. They're sometimes amended, so there is no variation and they're approved, so it's not easy for us to find them. And that's the reason why we don't record that information when they're lodged, that they've applied for variation, because it may be that it doesn't get approved, or it may be that the variation is removed through the assessment process. So anything's possible, but it's not something that would be easy for us to track.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Councillor Werner, are you still proposing that?
Can I just ask a question?
Go ahead, Councillor Curry.
Yeah, just so basically, sorry, I feel like I'm echoing. So just in response, it appears that these variations variations, so this is a standard practice, is it, that occurs across all councillors, Mr Barber?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so you're saying there is no need to report these variations because they are normally minor residential DA variations, is that correct?
No, we do have an obligation to report the variations, but we don't have an obligation to report where a variation was applied for and not approved. It's only the ones that get approved that we have to report on.
Right, so that reporting, the requirement for the reporting is simply to state as it does in this current report, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. So I believe you were the mover of this officer recommendation. So do you accept Councillor Werner's amendment, or in addition to your to the recommendation? Yeah.
I think it was.
Oh, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Barlow, do you accept that addition to the recommendation?
I can't read the screen at all.
Yeah.
Shall I read it out?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I cannot read it.
Yeah, okay.
Unless
So
it's
the
highlighted.
first part, which is the part that was originally there, sorry, if you could just scroll up a little bit.
If you colour it, I'll be able to read it.
Yep, so part one, if we could just see part one. We're seeing part two at the moment, which is good, but we just need to be scrolled up a little bit further so we can see the first part. That's it. Yep, thank you. So that the report on the use of clause 4.6 of Council's local environment plans to vary development standards in the determination of development applications during the quarter 3 of financial year 2022 to be received and noted. So that's the first part.
That was the original officer recommendation.
That's
Yep.
the officer recommendation, is simply to note and receive the report. And the second one was to provide more information about how those particular variations compare to other applications that have been made, but it looks like that's quite difficult.
Well, I guess I have concerns as a councillor that this is asking staff to report on things that aren't standard practice. And Mr Barber has already explained that some of that detailed information on DAs and variations is already available on the portal, the councillor or the DA tracker. So I would have concerns about asking staff to take on additional work.
Yeah, look, I do agree, and I think it does need a bit more work, but I do also think there should be more transparency as to why some things, you know, are varied and some things aren't. But I do think it needs a bit more work. So, yeah, happy for that to be removed for now.
Okay, so we are going back to the original officer recommendation that was moved by Councillor Barlow and seconded by Councillor Muscat. All of those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All those against say against. I declare the motion carried. Now we are moving on to item CPE 22.008, revised draft planning agreement advertising signage 133 to 137 Baxter Road and 118 Roby Street, Mascot. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation?
Move that way.
Councillor Curry moved, seconded by
Happy to move it. Second.
Councillor Barlow. Is there any discussion?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Jansen. So I just wanted to clarify in relation, actually, can I just ask you, appropriate councillor officer, just for the purposes of councillors and people listening, just to give a brief overview, please?
Thank you. Is the council officer?
I can do that.
Thank you, Mr Barber.
Through you, Chair. So there's a state policy that governs outdoor advertising that applications must be assessed against, and it also has provision for councils to enter into a planning agreement with the proponent for a sign. And the principle behind that is that there's some sharing of the financial benefit that comes from outdoor advertising, and that money that comes to council is put into road safety and pedestrian safety and public transport improvement initiatives in the local area. So we have quite a few of these in Bayside, particularly around the airport, where outdoor advertising is quite popular and quite lucrative. This is another one of those agreements. This sign is already in place, and there was an agreement for it that has lapsed. It's been recently given another 5 years extension to be displayed, and so this is the agreement that we've negotiated with the proponent for $28,000 per year of the revenue to be shared with council. So that money goes into a reserve with the funds that are generated from other signs with similar agreements, and those funds have begun to accumulate, and we're putting together at the moment a plan that we need to agree with Transport for New South Wales as to how we can spend that money in the local area on those road safety and public transport and cycling improvements. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. I have a...
Thank you. Can I just clarify then, Mr. Barber? So the rent is $28,560 for the first year. Is that correct?
That's correct, yep.
And then it is the new base rent is increased by CPI each year thereafter. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And is there a ratchet clause in place so that the rent cannot be reduced?
It's to be increased by CPI every year, so unless CPI is negative, it would always go up.
So it will be just the wording. I just want to clarify the wording in the report because the wording can be interpreted as 28,560 plus CPI in the first year. So just clarifying that it is just that the wording is clear to be that is the base rent for each of the 5 years plus CPI added on for each year. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The final dot point there where those figures are listed says plus CPI per year each year. So yeah, it's a cumulative amount.
But it says from a perception perspective, though, it still clearly articulates the 28,560 each year as well.
Yeah, that's true because we don't know what the CPI amount would be, but it's per year for each year, so it's added on every year.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. I had a similar question, and is there a way to kind of clarify that in the executive summary? Because on first read, it looks like the base rate
Yep.
for each year.
Yeah, the agreement's attached. I can check the agreement to make sure that the words there are reflective of that, but that's the basis of the agreement.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item by councillors?
Chair, I have a question.
I think that was Councillor Muscat who had a virtual hand up first.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I have a question. It says that the final agreement offer is as below. Prior signage agreement 51,368 payable upon execution. Does that mean that is how much they owe us in back pay?
Yes, that's correct. So there was an agreement in place that has wound up, and that is an outstanding amount.
Thank you.
Councillor Werner?
Thank you. Through the chair, has there been any resident objections to the signage?
Through you, Chair, the sign was approved. Consent was given through the DA process. I don't know offhand whether there are any objections to that DA when it was submitted. I can check that though.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion from councillors? So there being no further discussion, I put the motion on the screen moved by Councillor Curry and seconded by Councillor Barlow. All those in favour say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those against the motion say against. I declare the motion carried. There being no further items, well actually item 8 on the agenda is nil, so we move straight to closing of the meeting, and there being no further items, I declare the meeting closed at 7:13 p.m.
Good evening. I declare the meeting of the City Works and Assets Committee meeting of the 13th of April 2022 open at 7:25 p.m. For the community who are listening, I believe we have one councillor who's participating in the meeting remotely, the Mayor, Dr. Christina Curry. Everyone at this meeting is reminded to conduct themselves in a polite and professional manner, keep communication factual, use appropriate language and tone. I also ask councillors to observe the requirements under the Code of Meeting Practice and Meeting Etiquette. And finally, I also remind you that the video recording of this meeting is an official record of council and may be made available to persons upon request in accordance with the Government Information Public Access Act 2009. No other recordings are permitted. I'd like to begin by acknowledging country. Bayside Council respects the traditional custodians of the land, elders past, present and emerging on which this meeting takes place, and we acknowledge the Gadigal and Bidjigal clans of the Sydney Basin. I'd ask councillors to move a procedural motion to allow our colleague to participate in the meeting online. Moved Councillor Jansen, seconded Councillor Fardell. All those in favour, all against. I declare that carried. We have one apology from Councillor Douglas, who's unable to attend tonight. The mover and seconder for the apologies. Councillor Fardell, Councillor Jansen, all those in favour, all those against. Declare that carried. Disclosures of interest. Councillors, are there any disclosures to make regarding the agenda tonight? No disclosures of interest. Minutes of the previous meeting. I have a mover and seconder for the previous minutes.
I'll move that way.
Councillor Barlow, Councillor Jansen, all those in favour, all those against, declare that carried. Excellent. We now move to the public forum. We have two speakers for the public forum tonight. The speakers are advised that a warning bell will sound when only 1 minute of speaking time remains. I believe we'll begin with Miss Elise Bruce, affected resident, speaking for the officer recommendation regarding flooding behaviour, CWA 22.002. Miss Bruce? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just... Take your time, sorry.
Chair. So I'm a resident of Mascot. I recently attended one of the Mayor's drop-in centres just to raise an issue that I had experienced as a resident. And she kindly mentioned the agenda of this meeting tonight, and in particular the report on the flooding behaviour. So I just wanted to share, as I mentioned, my experience as a resident. So I live opposite Mascot Memorial Park. That is in the H1 zone that's demonstrated on in figure 6 on page 15 of the notes for tonight, the agenda, which is classified, as I mentioned, H1 with generally safe for vehicles, people and buildings. I have just renewed my building insurance, not contents, just building. I'm on a 3-bedroom, single-storey Californian bungalow, and was quite concerned to see my monthly premium on that building insurance went from $150 a month up to $720 a month. When queried as to why, with my same insurer, it was the flood risk. So as I mentioned, H1 is generally safe for vehicles and people and buildings, but clearly a major insurer, one of the big 4 underwriters, has decided that it's of a concern. And I just think it would be interesting to watch that as other residents perhaps come up for their own building renewals or insurance renewals this year, to how insurers are assessing the flood risk for the area. So as I mentioned, I shared this experience with the Mayor, who thought it would be helpful just to share the context of considering the actual well to potentially becoming, frankly, uninsurable, and at those costs for most families in this area that is uninsurable. I found another insurer for the moment, but I'm not holding my breath until I'm insurers become concerned, especially as we've all seen, the flooding and insurance issues lately. So that was the extent of what I wanted to mention tonight. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms Bruce. Does anyone have any questions for Ms Bruce? Councillors? No, thank you. Councillors, do I have a mover and a seconder for item CWA?
Happy to move.
Moved Councillor Curry, seconded Councillor Souness. Is there any discussion?
I'll make a comment.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, can I just thank Ms Bruce for attending tonight and speaking on this item. It's, I've got a lot of feedback. Mr. Soot, is it possible to... I'll try. Yep. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's better. Yeah, I just want to thank you for coming tonight. I think it's really important, to hear from residents and understand the impacts that, different, I guess, decisions have. And, we've certainly experienced some unprecedented weather, but also to understand, in relation to the flooding zones, and this is a second report. There was a previous report at the last committee, and in this report we've certainly asked for more details. And one of the, so there's a few different aspects there, but Chair, one of the things we spoke about last committee, which I'd like further, which I cannot see articulated in this paper, and one of those was to determine where the hotspots are, and I note that we currently have a have you say out at the moment to help council with understanding where ongoing issues are with flooding, but specifically what we really need to determine and understand from council is where are the hotspots and what are we doing about it. And when we've determined the priorities, what funding opportunities do we then source in order to make, whatever it is, in order to reduce the issues that exist?
Mr Barber?
Through your chair, the report identifies some hotspots that have come out of flood studies, and also some areas that are more frequently reported or complained about by residents in terms of flooding issues. We haven't gone down into specific locations, but that information we could share. We did show at the council briefing a spatial representation of it that showed like a heat map of where we get the most issues with flooding, and that really summarises the resident requests that we get. In terms of funding sources, there's the stormwater levy, which is a component of rates, so that's a funding source that's available for these kind of mitigation works. Other than that, there are grants available. When we go through the process of doing the studies and then the mitigation plans, we can then apply for grants to do stormwater works that reduce flood impact. And we do generally have a few projects on the go each year, so we are slowly dealing with those areas as the funding opportunities arise.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Barber.
Thank you. Just through the chair. So, so when we're determining our priority areas, do we then have an action plan to deal with those in priority area?
Through your chair, so the flood studies identify the highest risk areas, and that's generally a combination of depth of water and the speed that the water is moving at. So they're the areas that are of the highest hazard, and the resident speaker spoke about those sort of graduations. So it's the ones that have the highest risk level or highest hazard level that we tend to tackle first. There is the flood studies are done generally progressively, so as one's finished, we then pick the top priorities from that one and start working on detailed investigation and design, and then look for funding sources, and then as another study's done in another catchment, we go through the same process. So it's really a rolling program to identify and deal with the highest priorities in each catchment. So we have 8 catchments in Bayside. So they're prioritised really on the basis of the highest level of hazard and dealing with the risk that comes with that.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. So we do have a plan then that works through those in order to try and alleviate the flooding that occurs in those areas. Is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so I think that's important for residents to understand that that there is a priority list based on a number of criteria, I guess, and then also this flooding, have your say, will also assist that. So then there's the major priority areas, and then what are we doing in relation to where they're not major infrastructure issues, but they're I guess more suburban streets, if you like, where there are issues, and does that mean, are we looking at the drainage in those and the drainage maintenance?
Through your chair, yeah, there's really 2 types of issues that cause flooding. One is, as you say, a maintenance issue. So drains can become blocked with debris or sediment over time, and so we do have crews that are out every day proactively and reactively dealing with those sorts of issues. Sometimes drains can block during a rain event, so cardboard or a mattress or something washes down and blocks a drain and causes an issue that we need to respond to. So that work does go on, and the other issue is where the infrastructure is not able to manage the water, and they're the issues that are identified through the flood studies, and that does take into account resident feedback. So we do consult extensively when we're doing those studies, because residents are a great source of information about historical problems, so we can try and deal with those as part of the flood study process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barber. And just one other question in relation to the issue that Ms. Bruce raised. So how, obviously that's an issue, I imagine, across councils in relation to flood zones and insurance. Can you just explain how they are determined?
Through your chair, insurance companies rely on the data that they gather themselves to assess risk and therefore set premiums. Some of them will ask councils for information, or will take it from our website if it's available. Most of them actually employ their own flood engineers and do their own assessments to help form their views about where the risks are and what the appropriate premiums are. So the work that council does doesn't necessarily affect insurance premiums. The insurance companies are generally ahead of the game in gathering their own data and making their own assessments of risk to set their premiums. But it is something that happens across the state.
Thank you.
Councillor Fardell. It's covered by Dr. Curry. Councillor Sonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Barber mentioned certain high-level areas. There's a strata or a differentiation of various things. So what's the most critical area we need to deal with? What's the highest priority in our LGA in terms of obviously description and then rough estimate of cost to remediate?
Through your chair, I couldn't tell you the exact locations of them. I'd have to look in the flood studies to tell you that. In terms of the most problematic areas, Mascot is the one that we get the most issues and complaints with, followed by Botany, and then Sans Souci. And what they have in common is that they're all very low-lying and flat, so it is difficult to get the water away from them. But I have to come back to you in terms of particular projects and costings.
So it's more or less natural topography that dictates, through the chair again, natural topography dictates the problems. So I live in the Sans Souci area, and I know that at certain rain events, certain things occur, and a lot of people are used to that. Now, I can't understand, and I feel for the resident that came and spoke, how the premium ramped up. I would imagine the whole area, the premiums will ramp up, but that's again for the insurance companies to to display to their consumers, to their customers, why they've increased with no ill effect to the area, because really there wasn't a lot of storm damage that has occurred in the LLGA. The other question I had in terms of infrastructure, through the chair again, Sydney Water style infrastructure, open canals, what responsibility does our council or the council have in regards to those? Because a certain question was asked to me around Spring Street, where a property owner, it was this particular lady's son, because she's an elderly lady, part of the back of their land is starting to subside as a result of some cracks in the stormwater open culvert, open drainage area. So maybe we can get a little bit of information on that.
Through the chair, I can probably answer that one. Sydney Water assets are obviously owned by Sydney Water, so the responsibility for council, I suppose, is more of an advocacy type responsibility, where we advocate for maintenance on other agencies' assets that we're made aware of through our ratepayers and through our residents. So obviously we won't go and spend ratepayers' money on an asset that council doesn't own, but we'll definitely advocate on their behalf to the relevant authorities.
So generally, in the past, if there is a failure of that culvert or that, I wouldn't call it retaining wall, but that concrete structure, Sydney Water comes to the party more or less and remedies that issue rather than pushing it off towards council. Has that been the case?
That's correct, yep.
All right, good. All right. The other question I had is gross pollutant traps. Are they Sydney Water? They're obviously an asset that council has installed through consultation with Sydney Water. Are we providing the cleaning regime, or is it something that Sydney Water gets involved in occasionally?
We've installed a number of GPTs on council infrastructure. Sydney Water have also got some of their own GPTs, but all of the GPTs that councils have installed, we've got our maintenance regime, and council's responsible for cleaning them.
Okay, even though it's in Sydney Water infrastructure zones, so to speak.
Council wouldn't actually install them on a Sydney Water owned asset, so all of the ones that we've installed.
So the one at Cooks River, the one Muddy Creek, that GPT that's there, that's our asset or their asset?
Muddy Creek's Sydney Water assets, so we're not cleaning the
So
Muddy
we
Creek.
don't clean that, so it's up to them.
That's correct.
So they've obviously got a regime. Do we sort of tap them on the shoulder and say, you're not up to scratch? Because when that accumulates rubbish, then it backs up further up the line. So that's one of the issues that occurred in the recent event.
Yeah, we do follow up with Sydney Water when we're made aware of the issues that their infrastructure is causing on council's infrastructure, and they action it in the timeframes that they set for themselves.
Okay, fair enough. All right, thank you.
Councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I might ask a question. This is probably directed at Mr. Spelter. Last meeting, I asked if we had any sort of quantification of how much damage has been done to council assets by the recent floods. Do we have any idea at this point now?
Through the chair, I'd have to take it on notice and get back to you, because with the recent East Coast low, obviously there's been damage, a fair bit of tree damage, and obviously foreshore damage. It's very hard to put a dollar figure on it at this point. But we are gathering a lot of that information because there is some federal and state government emergency relief funding available for councils. So we are in the process of collecting it
We
all.
should definitely be taking advantage of that. Anything further, councillors? No, nothing else? All those in favour? All those against? Declare that carried. Thank you again, Miss Bruce, for coming and addressing us. Item CWA 22.004, lease update 72 Laycock Street, Bexley North. We have one speaker, Mrs. Maria Alexandru, speaking against the officer recommendation. Mrs. Alexandru.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Maria Alexandru, and I've been a financial and active member of the Order of AHEPA for 40 years. I'm speaking in opposition to the recommendation before you this evening related to 72 Laycock Street, Bexley North, and the Order of AHEPA New South Wales Incorporated. In view of what I'm going to say, I request that this committee defers Mr Mamo's recommendations as per his report until councillors, in particular the new councillors, obtain advice as to theirs and council's legal position, and for the new councillors to familiarise themselves on the project's background. 7 years is a very long time from the date of the original tender, and 3 DAs later. So a few more months to secure council's legal position and for councillors to be comfortable with their vote will not affect the project. This project has caused angst and severe division within AHEPA for the past 7 years. We are an organisation that has been present in Australia since 1934. Most of our members were unaware of the hierarchy within AHEPA in Sydney in 2016. Were negotiating with Bayside Council to tender for the Bexley Bowling Club project. This has caused 2 distinctive factions to occur within AHEPA, the first time in its 88-year history in Australia. It has not only affected our association in New South Wales, but also within other states. Members of our organisation and people outside of AHEPA cannot understand why Council has persevered with the current purported hierarchy in our organisation for 7 years. When they have failed to meet deadlines and Council continues supporting the project and AHEPA, it makes no sense whatsoever. So with due respect, I ask Council and councillors to consider the following. Could Council be sued in future with respect to knowingly assisting members from the opposing faction with whom they're dealing? Also, could Council be sued for knowingly receiving assets from the association in breach of trust? If that is to occur, then Bayside Council could be held liable, and in addition to any relief awarded, will be ordered to pay costs. Also, is there a possibility that councillors who are involved in supporting the current hierarchy within AHEPA and the project could be separately sued and or pursued, maybe by ICAC? It is our members' opinion that the association is cash flow insolvent. However, under the guise of privilege and against AHEPA's very strict rules, our members are being denied access to the meetings and information regarding the financial affairs of the association or the progress of the Bexley project. If a liquidator is appointed in the future to AHEPA, Bayside Council may be pursued in respect to void transactions under Part 5.7b of the Corporations Act. Therefore, with respect, there is no basis whatsoever for Bayside Council to have any comfort that any legally binding AFL has been entered into with the order of AHEPA New South Wales Inc. At all times, Council has been on notice of a defective appointment of the committee members from the opposing faction, and that notice disables Council from being able to rely on any of the assumptions that would ordinarily be available to them under sections 23 and 24 of the Associations and Corporations Act. Whilst that Act declares a committee member's acts as valid, despite any defect in his or her appointment as per section 28.4 of the Associations and Corporations Act, this provision, which replicates the substance of provisions that have long existed in company law statutes, does not operate to validate acts of a person who assumes to act as a committee member without any purported appointment at all. Together with rules expressed in a similar fashion, it targets where a slip has been made in appointing a committee member, not where substantive provisions pertaining to an appointment have been ignored or overridden, as reported in 2 Supreme Court cases unrelated to AHEPA. So the agreement for licence and lease is not an agreement at all. Unbeknown to AHEPA's general members, a mortgage to a gentleman not known to our side's members was executed on the 23rd of March of 2022 and registered on the title of AHEPA's only remaining property in Surrey Hills. We understand that Council doesn't involve itself in the financial affairs of AHEPA. However, if the mortgagee lent funds or put down security for the bank guarantee of 1.65 million, does this not raise questions in Council or with councillors if AHEPA is in a financial position to fund the renovations to the Bexley Bowling Club? Was it actually AHEPA that had the funds for the bank guarantee that was late in being lodged, or was it the mortgagee? As it may not be the responsibility of council to carry out due diligence on a HEPA's financial statements provided in the original tender, council therefore may be unaware that some assets stated on those statements do not and did not belong to a HEPA New South Wales Incorporated, but to other entities within our association that the incorporation has no jurisdiction over. Council also appears to be relying on a general meeting of a HEPA of 29 October of 21 that passed certain motions. Council and councillors should be aware that many members who oppose the current hierarchy did not receive notification of that meeting. And we've got affidavits from some of those members testifying to that fact. I want council to be aware that for the 21 fiscal year, there were 360 members of the incorporation that were validated by the Supreme Court of New South Wales. Our side has in excess of 200 financial members of those 360 who are entitled to vote at any general meeting of our incorporation. So to be entitled to vote...
I'm sorry, Mrs Alexandra. I think I'm being motioned that you're out of time. Can you just wind up, please?
Mr Chair, John Mr.
If you just wind up.
Okay. I just want people to know that most of our members did not receive notification for that meeting, so the vote would have been completely different had our members been present. Can I just go on?
No, you need to wind up.
Can we move an extension, Mr Chair?
Okay. No, that's fine.
You can move it. All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against?
Silence.
Sure. You can have an additional minute.
Thank you. So a HEPA had 20 business days, which is nearly a month, to lodge a bank guarantee, following the default notice of 24th of Feb. So why did a HEPA leave it to the last minute? Who knows? Why is council overlooking the default? Who knows? Supposedly because of a technical issue with the bank. So, and interestingly, even though, this is the last one, even though the deadline was the 28th of March, Mr Mamo's report appears to say that a HEPA had until the next council meeting of the 27th of April. So I'm no mathematician, but that's definitely in excess of the 20 business days stated in the General Manager's report of the 23rd of Feb. So finally, what other council would be so patient with a tenderer and continue extending the time from start to finish? So, and a lot of people are asking the questions why. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Mrs Alexandra.
Mr Chair, can I just make a declaration which I missed out on?
Thought you might.
I have made in the past, so I am a former member of a HEPA, and it's the very same declaration as I've made previously, non-pecuniary, non-significant. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Yeah, a mover and a seconder.
I'll move the
Councillor
officer
Jansen.
recommendation.
Well, I'll move an amendment.
And seconded Councillor Curry.
Well, I'll move an amendment, and I hope everyone supports it, that it goes, we've got a GM briefing next week. There is so much detail that every single new councillor should know before they finally make their informed decision. I have concerns that within 20 business days is within 20 business days, but apparently it's not within 20 business days. There's a lot there. I'm of the opinion that we've got a GM briefing, I think, next week, and all councillors, I think, should be fully informed, should know exactly what's been going on, you know, the whole details. There is so much in those reports. You need to go back to why has it taken 7 years? You know, it's a joke, but the building is, you know, dilapidated now, which is a shame. But so I'm just saying that I'm moving an amendment that it's deferred, so it goes to a GM briefing, so that every single councillor is fully informed, not just listening, not reading this. There's questions in here I'd like to ask, but that will be done maybe at the GM briefing. There's a legal opinion coming at some stage, which has to be given to every councillor, so that could all be done next week, not just, you're voting blind if you're voting it the way it is now.
I'd like to second that, Chair, and I'd like to also add that if we can get a report from the officers that compares and contrasts the current version of the development application that's going up for a HEPA versus the original tendered version, I'm using tautology now, version of the version. But there was a version that was approved by the council of the time, 6 years or whatever it is, doesn't matter how long ago, for a particular facility to exist on that building. Can we have just a comparison of was approved by the council of the day versus what's being put up at the moment? And the other information that Councillor Curry talked about, the timing and all that, that can be discussed by people who may be unaware or clear at the information session.
All right, thank you, councillors. Does anyone have any questions for the officers? So that
I
tends to be the
think,
way we proceed at these committees, debating.
Through you, Chair, I just have a question. That this is an addition to the officer recommendation or an
No,
amendment?
I assume this is a foreshadowed motion because you're just deferring it.
We have that.
No, so you can't. It's a foreshadowed motion if you're just negativing the motion. That's fine.
Well, let's ask the people who moved it, Councillor Bowen, if they can incorporate your recommendation, my recommendation, and no?
They're moving a recommendation, which is not.
Which is the opposite of what Councillor Barlow's moving. So, anyway, so we have the motion and the foreshadowed motion. Sorry, excuse me, councillors. Any discussion?
So what, so we have a motion. What
Can we
is
see
the
foreshadowed
motion?
Well, your foreshadowed motion is to defer it to a GM briefing, correct?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's what I'm,
Foreshadowed motion, is that up there so we can just see it?
I can't read that. Can you read that?
Oh, barely.
I can't read it at all.
To the next available GM briefing, yep. The original DA at tender time versus the current proposal.
So somewhere between very big and very small is fine. It says that the item be deferred to the next GM briefing. Are you happy with that, Councillor Barlow?
Yes, yeah, well, you're reading it, I can't read it.
Yeah. You can assume I'm not lying to you.
It's so correct.
Look, so I just had a question. I think it's, so we have an agreement for lease at the moment, or so I'm just reading the report. So to remain in compliance with the terms of the AFL, we have a series of next steps and additional obligations that both the HEPA New South Wales and Council must work towards. These include Council issuing a HEPA New South Wales with a works licence, payment of rental backdated to the date of AFL execution, and within 1 month of a HEPA New South Wales obtaining development consent, they must propose a licensed builder or project manager for Council's consideration. So can we just get an outline of where we're at in that and what Council's obligations are at the moment? Would you be able to expand on that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, and through the chair. So as you indicated, we do have an executed agreement for lease. Council, as the report indicates, Council are obligated to continue to perform under the terms of that agreement for lease. I've got Jamie Modem, Council's General Counsel, with us at the moment, so I might pass over to Jamie, who can step through, I guess, the parameters of what need to be done.
Thank you, Jordan. The next step is fairly straightforward in that there's a works licence to be executed. The terms of that were agreed at the time of executing the AFL. It's simply a case of it being executed. There's the General Manager already has a delegation to do so, and that's simply Council's next obligation.
When do we have to complete that by?
It's just as soon as possible. Now, everything that's been done, that's required has been done.
20 days means 30 days or 40.
Sorry, Councillor Souness, you can take your turn to speak. Councillors, is there any further discussion?
Through you, Chair, can I just ask if the council doesn't follow this process, what's the consequences?
Look, if we're getting into the legal consequences of council taking certain steps, either in compliance or not in compliance with an executed agreement, it may be something better dealt with in confidential session rather than public session.
Sure. Does anyone want to discuss that in confidential session?
Yeah, but, well, this is why I'm saying go to a GM briefing so that we've got, I don't know who this gentleman is, but I gather he is, that's what I'm saying.
He's been an employee of council for, I believe, several months,
12,
maybe
in
a year
fact.
now.
Maybe I've seen you on screen, that's it.
But through
That'd
you,
be
Chair,
correct.
we have the opportunity to go into a closed session this evening to ask further questions.
sorry, this is-
Yeah, because
I
I want to
agree
know
with
what
Councillor
20 days
Jansen.
means.
All right.
The
Well-
resolution of council is within 20 days.
Business days.
But we can,
Business
if we
days.
move to a closed session, we can ask those questions.
No, we can
Very-
ask that
that's
outside
a, that's a
closed session.
public I think everyone in the room would love to know what within 20 business days means. And that was a resolution that was made at council with 15 councillors, and I would have thought that that was a document of being on council for a very long time, that the resolution of the council is what is actually stands. And suddenly we get this report saying, oh, but we can just go to the 23rd of April, which is the day after my husband died. Anyway, so you can go into a confidential session would be good because there's a lot of questions, but I really think the GM briefing would be a lot better.
I'm sorry, I mean, feel free to answer that, but you are under no obligation to. Obviously, you said you would like to discuss legal advice in a confidential session, and you're more than free to, but Councillor Barlow has
But surely, Chair, with
asked a
with
question,
respect,
we've got to
with
say
res-
quite a rude way to you.
no, with respect, let's just work out the 20 days, what that means. 20 working days. 20 business days.
Certainly, this particular question doesn't really go to
Sure,
council's
feel free to answer.
council's legal rights. So, the AFL provides that in the case of a default, termination requires a default notice to be issued, and if that default is not rectified within 20 business days, that council would have the right to then terminate. Excuse me. What was determined at the last council meeting was that the decision on whether or not to terminate would need to come back to the following council meeting, i.e. Council officers were not authorised to actually issue a termination notice, even if the default's not rectified within 20 business days. The situation that arose was that HEPA, although they did not meet the 20 business days, were able to provide the bank guarantee and therefore rectify the default before the next council meeting, which of course we haven't even got to as yet. So the position is now they are no longer in default, meaning we no longer have a right to terminate.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Do we still want to move this into confidential session? Yes, no? Well, if not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye.
Foreshadow motion?
No, the motion. All those against?
What's the motion?
The motion is the officer's recommendation.
It's the original, It's the original. The original.
Right.
Original, well, I'm definitely against that, and so you can close the debate down now.
I've put the motion.
Yep, okay,
All
that's
those
fine.
against? I can repeat myself. All those against?
Against.
Against,
Right. I
Of
declare that
course.
carried.
and so, no, we can't move another motion
No.
because there needs to be more information and you're very
Alright.
foolish if you haven't taken it.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow.
That's all right.
Item CWA 22.003, Salisbury Avenue, Bexley, proposed left-only turn onto Forest Road. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
Which one's
Moved,
this?
Councillor
Sorry.
Jansen. This is, it's just off Forest Road.
Salisbury Avenue.
Seconded, Councillor Fardell.
Wait a minute, might be one I want to speak on, when I find it. No, it disappeared.
While we're waiting for Councillor Barlow, do we have any discussion?
Oh, through you, Chair, can I ask, obviously the officers are in support of this petition that's come from residents to install a left-only turn. That's correct?
Through you, Chair. So this matter's come up because there's a petition and council has a policy on petitions. that requires them to be reported to a council meeting, so that's why it's here. In terms of the matter itself, it's a road that's not under council's control, so it's not something that we could do ourselves. Transport for New South Wales have just started their review of the impact of the M8 after 12 months, which they were required to do as part of their approval. So the recommendation is that we refer this to them as an issue that's been raised by our residents that they should consider as part of that review, and also request from them some of their traffic count information so we can form our own view on as to whether this is an issue or not in terms of the number of vehicles making the turn and heavy vehicles in particular. So that's the way we are proposing the recommendation.
Sorry, can I just say perhaps and something that I think, the consideration of the ward councillors, perhaps we should have a stronger move to Transport for New South Wales than simply passing this along. Potentially we could also advocate for this to happen for our residents.
Well, Chair, can I ask just a conversation piece about it? There's obviously a process, needs to go through traffic committee, aside from the
It's
feelings.
not a local road, so. It's not a local road.
Regardless, still has to go through traffic committee. That's the process that we have because Salisbury leads on to a non-local road, correct?
Yeah,
So-
the sign's going to be on Forest Road.
It doesn't matter whether we still have to
It
have
doesn't go
concurrence.
through the traffic committee.
No, it does. Everything, every change, every sign change, whether it's Forest Road, needs to
Sorry,
go through the
can I-
traffic committee. It does.
Just clarify that, I don't think.
Through you, Chair,
Clarify.
the matters that go through traffic committee are those that council has the delegation to enact. So this one is something that council cannot enact, so.
But it still goes through traffic committee, in other words, to give us the opportunity to say yay or nay, because we have our member, our representative on the traffic committee, we have the local member, the local state member representing on the traffic committee, we have the police, and we have the Transport for New South Wales delegate, plus another host of other groups of people. When it goes to the traffic committee, we get to see what happens and what the desire is of those particular groups. You can't say to me, it doesn't go to traffic committee, it must.
It could go through traffic committee as an informal item.
It can be whatever it
But
likes,
the
it still goes to
information-
traffic committee
The-
I was
and
actually,
documented.
yeah,
So can I just ask Mr. Barber, can you just clarify the position on that?
Yeah, so as I said, traffic committee is set up under legislation. Council is given certain authority to do certain things on roads that are under council's control. And when it uses that authority, it must seek the advice of a traffic committee before it makes a decision. So changes to parking controls and things like that are on council roads, before council decides to put up a sign restricting parking, for example, it must seek the advice of the committee. So they have to make their way through the committee before they come to council for a decision. The committee does deliberate on other matters that are of concern to members on there, but it's not their role to provide advice on that. They can advocate, but it's not something that's part of their remit under the legislation.
Sorry, just to clarify the point Councillor Souness is making, Transport for New South Wales doesn't have to refer changes they make to state roads through the local traffic committee, do they?
No, they don't.
No, they don't.
But they generally bring it to the traffic committee as a matter of courtesy, so we're aware of what's going on, because
Yep.
we don't want a whole group of neighbours in Salisbury or whatever street waking up one morning and there's a no left-hand turn or no right-hand turn sign erected by parties unknown, correct?
Through your chair, there's an item on the agenda for general business where things can be raised that are not necessarily part of the committee's responsibility, but other agencies do raise them as a courtesy.
can I, I'd just actually like to either add a part 5. I mean, the street is a beautiful street. They're ruining the trees. I did look it up. The trees aren't on the heritage list. It's a beautiful street. Forgotten the name of it. But I would like part 5 just refer it to the traffic to see whether they can put a signage up like no, I know a 3-tonne limit or no trucks. Something, maybe because we mightn't get the right turn, but some other deterrent at each end to say no trucks or whatever the legal thing is you can put up there.
The truck symbol or the crossroad.
I mean, so I prefer that as part 5, that it's referred to the traffic committee to investigate a deterrent for the trucks. And they are destroying the trees, I believe.
Well, the question through the chair, Mr. Barber, is it a light traffic thoroughfare?
I don't think so.
I don't believe it is at the present time.
So
That
whatever
is, it is a
can
council
be
road,
done.
so council could look at
Yeah.
other measures.
Okay.
Through the chair, I agree with Councillor McDougall that we need to put more pressure on Transport New South Wales, because reading the concern here of the residents, it's actually quite dangerous. I mean, obviously we're going by what they're saying, but I have no reason to disbelieve them. So I really feel that we need to start putting pressure on Transport New South Wales and find out what information they have and, you know, go into discussions with them. Because as it states here, you're not getting any feedback from them.
Yeah, so I think maybe item 5, rather than saying that it be deferred, that it be referred to the traffic committee, I think is what we...
Referred.
Yeah, referred to the traffic committee to consider other deterrents, but I think we can also go ahead and send this petition on to Transport for New South Wales, who are the decision maker.
They might know something we don't know that they can put up.
I agree.
That's all.
And then item 6, that council supports the, notify Transport for New South Wales that they support their consideration of the residents' request.
And they also haven't had the meeting that they were supposed to hold, the traffic meeting,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, so that's been deferred till some other date, so, okay. Hopefully there's a green on that, so our green councillor needs to contact the person on the traffic. I'll tell you her name after. I don't know, somebody.
Councillors?
So through you,
Councillor
Chair,
Jansen.
can I just ask Mr Barber that with councillor requests like this that are forwarded on to Transport for New South Wales, is there kind of strong advocacy from Bayside Council accompanying that information to Transport for New South Wales?
Through you, Chair, if you wanted to add more weight to it, it's often the case that the council resolves that the mayor writes letters to either the agency and or ministers or local members. That's a way that you can add that weight to it from a councillor's point of view. We tend to deal with them more on a bureaucratic level, I guess, a technical level. So that's a suggestion if you wanted to add that weight to it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing to add as well to this, because obviously it's come from residents who have concerns. I saw the tree damage in the report, as well as some examples of accidents. So I think that was...
Thousands of residents were kept awake every night with the traffic thundering down.
Anyway, I just think as a general principle, we have a lot of residents in this area who are dealing with the effects of what's happened on Forest Road and the M5 East toll, and if this is the solution that the streets come up with, and they've taken the time to organise a petition, and in fact a council compliant petition, we should do whatever we can to support them.
No, I agree.
And I think maybe supports the residents' concerns to Transport by writing to Transport for New South Wales and our local members of Parliament. Sure, you can figure out the wording of that after we move on from the recording. Councillors, is there any further discussion? All those in favour, all those against, declare that carried. Item CWA 22.005, Brighton Bars Amenities Building. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
Chair, can I just declare a non-pecuniary interest just because I attended an event there, although I did pay for my own ticket. I've declared this on a previous agenda item related to this, so I will leave the meeting for this discussion.
I think we have the same declaration from Councillor.
Yes, I have that same declaration, but if Councillor Curry is leaving the room, then I'll need to leave the room too.
Sorry, Councillor Curry, did you say you were leaving? Oh, she has.
She's left the building.
Can I also declare a less, non-significant, less non-pecuniary interest as well?
Oh no, sorry, she did because it was a fundraiser. She left last time and you didn't, because she's on the...
Actually, Councillor, through you, Chair, mine is the...
Less than significant.
Not less than significant non-pecuniary, so I'll stay in the room, whereas the mayor has had to leave because the fundraiser was...
In support of...
Yeah, in support of the women's shelter, which I'm not the chair of.
Thank you. I'd also
Sorry,
like to
thanks for
declare
clarifying.
a significant non-pecuniary interest because I was at that fundraiser.
No, we've got it up on the, thank you for sending that in. Councillors, do we have a mover and a seconder?
We can move that, Mr Chair.
Is that we? Councillor Sonis, do we have a seconder? Councillor Fardell.
I don't want to touch those yet.
Yeah, we're going to do that one.
Councillors, any discussion?
Confidential, isn't it?
I wouldn't mind discussing the confidential material.
I've got to
Have
go
a
at
mover
midnight.
and a seconder. What, sorry?
I've got to go at midnight though.
I'd move to discuss that in confidential session. Have a seconder. Councillor Fardell, all those in favour, all those against? To discuss the material, Councillor Barlow. Thank you, councillors. Item CWA 22.006, 1 to 7 Green Street, Banks Meadow. I have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Jansen, seconded Councillor Sonis. Any discussion?
No need. No need, Mr Chair.
No need. No.
It's confidential, so I'll
Congratulations on to all the staff in property and obviously in waste for completing this. This will make a real difference to the area. I think the park is going to look fantastic once we're able to expand it as well. So it's really a great strategic acquisition. So I think now we need to move into confidential session to deal with the final item. So members of the public, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room. Thank you for attending. We shut off the live feed.
Those reasons